My name is Celeste Bowen and I'm 33 years old. 3 weeks before my sister's wedding, my mom called me, voice bright as a save, the date, and removed my 7-year-old daughter from the guest list. Not just from her role as flower girl. From the wedding. A little girl who had spent 2 months practicing her petal toss in our hallway, twirling in a lilac dress every single night, counting her spins out loud. By the time I found out what my daughter's place at that wedding had actually been traded for, and exactly how much it had cost, I was already under contract to cook that wedding's dinner for 170 guests. So I cooked it, every course. And then, right before they wheeled out the cake, I stood up in the middle of that ballroom and tapped my glass with a spoon. What I said took about 3 minutes. My mother hasn't spoken to me since, and honestly, that's the least interesting part. Welcome back to Untold Secret Hub, where quiet women keep the receipts and the endings get earned, not gifted. If stories about family, betrayal, and boundaries are your kind of stories, pull up a chair, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from, and subscribe. Now let me start from the beginning. To understand the toast, you have to meet the girl who spent 16 years setting the table. My dad died of a heart attack when I was 17, and my sister Aubrey was 10. Dropped in the driveway between the car and the mailbox on an ordinary Tuesday. My mother, Renata, grieved him in the only language she's ever been fluent in. Appearances. Within a month, she had a rule, never spoken but enforced like gravity. A widow's house must never look like a widow's house. The lawn stayed edged. The Christmas cards went out on time. All 3 of us smiling, and somebody had to actually produce all that fine appearance on a pension and a part-time job at the fabric store. And that somebody was me. I bagged groceries after school. I learned to stretch a chicken across 3 dinners. At 18, I cooked Christmas for 18 relatives in my mother's kitchen. Turkey, 2 pies, the good tablecloth, and ate my own plate standing at the counter. Because the table only sat 18, and a hostess's daughter, my mother said, makes room. I want to be fair. My mother never once called it a burden I carried. She called it what I was good at. There's a difference between being loved and being useful. But when you're 17 and your father just died in the driveway, the 2 feelings arrive in the same casserole dish, and you can spend half your life without checking which one you've actually been fed. Aubrey was 10, and Aubrey was the baby, and babies get protected. I never resented her for that. I just took orders. It would take me another 16 years and 1 lilac dress to notice I'd never stopped. Here's the part of my story I'm proudest of, so forgive me if I linger. I own a catering company. The Bowen table, my name on a silver van, my knives in a roll, a rented kitchen on Vandermeer Road with a walk-in cooler I signed for myself at 27, hands shaking. 5 years now. Weddings, retirements, funeral lunches. The whole human calendar plated. My second in command is Marisol, 40, who can butterfly a chicken faster than most people can find the scissors, and who has exactly 1 facial expression for my family, which we'll get to. I married at 24, had Winnie at 26, divorced at 29, amicably, mostly. Her dad lives 2 states away and calls on Sundays. So it's me and Winnie. And let me tell you about Winnie, because she's the actual center of this story. My daughter is 7 and takes everything seriously. She lines her markers up by color family. She has a clipboard for her stuffed animals' birthdays. When she loves something, she practices it. That's her whole heart in 1 sentence. She is the kind of child adults describe as an old soul, by which they mean she notices everything. Which is worth remembering for later, because children who notice everything can also do math you wish they couldn't. Our house is 14 minutes from my mother's. And for years, our little duo orbited the family the way I always had. I brought the food, Winnie brought the joy, and we both mistook being needed for being included. Then last spring, my sister Aubrey came over with news and a bottle of sparkling something, and the orbit picked up speed. Aubrey was engaged to Holden Ashcroft. If you're not from a small town, let me translate that name for you. In Cedar Bluff, Ashcroft is the law firm on the square. The carved family pew 3rd from the front at First Methodist. The name on the hospital's new wing in letters you could read from a moving car. And above all of it, like a queen on a very tasteful throne, sits Cordelia Ashcroft, 69, Holden's grandmother. Pearls at breakfast, a voice that has never once needed to be raised. and a talent for making a compliment feel like an appraisal. Holden himself, I'll say now and mean it, is a sweet, unremarkable man who looks at my sister like she hung the moon. This story is not about Holden, but you should have seen my mother when the ring appeared. Renata didn't celebrate the engagement. She ascended into it. Do you understand? She said to me, gripping my forearm in her kitchen, that we will walk into the Ashcroft house through the front door, as family. Her whole life, my mother has been the poor relation, the cousin with the store, brand casserole, the widow the church ladies were kind to, in that particular way kindness can look down from. I knew all that. I even ached for her a little. What I didn't clock, standing in that kitchen, was the exchange rate forming behind her eyes. The quiet arithmetic of a woman who has finally been invited to the table, and is now calculating item by item what she's willing to pay to keep the seat. Spoiler, friends. The first item wasn't hers. My wedding gift to my sister came in 2 parts, and I need you to know the numbers because the numbers come back later wearing a bow tie. Part 1. The venue. Aubrey fell in love with Thistlewood Farm, the white barn, willow trees, chandeliers in the rafters. And Thistlewood wanted $6,800 down to hold a June Saturday. Nobody in my family had $6,800 lying around except the sister with the catering company and the terrifying spreadsheet habits. I wrote the check. I handed it to my mother in her kitchen, and she took it the way you take a napkin, mid-sentence, without looking, because she was busy reading an Ashcroft guest list out loud. Part 2. The food itself. 170 guests, 5 courses, my crew, my knives at cost, my gift from my hands. Now, because I run an actual business with actual insurance, everything went through the company paperwork. Standard contract, listed price, $9,300, with a line at the bottom in my own boring font. Balance waived at settlement, owner's gift. Marisol watched me sign it and did her one facial expression. That's a month of revenue, boss. It's family, I said Marisol, which in Marisol means more than most people's paragraphs. I want to be honest about my motives, since we're all friends here. Yes, it was love. It was also 17 years of muscle memory. The family needed a beautiful thing. I produced beautiful things. Therefore, somewhere in me, a girl eating Christmas dinner, standing at a counter believed this wedding was going to be the one that finally converted service into belonging. Keep an eye on her. She's about to learn the exchange rate. But the best part of the wedding in our house had nothing to do with chandeliers. In March, Aubrey came for dinner, knelt down on our kitchen floor to Winnie's exact eye level, and asked with full ceremony, "Winnie Bowen, will you be my flower girl?" My daughter went still the way she does when something matters too much to move. Then she nodded like a knight being sworn in, and said she would need to practice. Friends, did she practice? For 2 months our hallway was an aisle. She tore up junk mail into little paper petals and rationed them into a basket. You can't just dump them, Mama. You have to share them with the whole aisle. And she walked that runway every night after her bath, scattering paper with the focus of a surgeon. And then there was the dress. Lilac, with a tulle skirt that lifted when she turned. The first time she tried it on, she discovered spinning, and spinning became a discipline. She'd plant her arms, launch, and count out loud. 11, 12, 13, cheeks red, tulle flying, until she hit a personal best and reported it to me like a lab result. 18, Mama. 18 spins. The dress lived on her closet door where she could see it from bed. Some nights I'd catch her lying there just looking at it. This serious little person of mine, glowing at a piece of purple fabric because it meant I was chosen. I have a place in the beautiful thing. Hold that image. My family certainly didn't. In April, I hosted the menu tasting at my kitchen on Vandermeer Road. Both families, folding tables dressed up in linen, 6 courses on deck. It was the first time the full Ashcroft delegation entered my territory, and Cordelia Ashcroft arrived the way weather arrives, unhurried, inevitable, in gray silk. She tasted everything and complimented me in appraisals. This chicken is remarkable, you could charge city prices. And while she talked, her eyes did inventory. My second-hand chairs. My mother's outlet store dress, my daughter. Winnie was there helping the way she does, refilling bread baskets with 2 hands and folding extra napkins into fans. And beside Cordelia sat her granddaughter, Prudence, 6 years old, white dress, patent shoes, bored senseless. Cordelia watched the 2 girls the way you'd watch 2 swatches against a wall. And then she said it lightly to the room. Prudence has been the flower girl at 3 Ashcroft weddings. That child was born for a church aisle. A little silence, the kind that has a draft in it. My mother laughed too fast and smoothed it with her hostess proverb, the one I'd grown up under, the one she trots out whenever generosity needs a chaperone. Well, everyone gives something to make a wedding beautiful. Everyone gives something. Remember that sentence. Its load bearing. The tasting wound down. The Ashcrofts made their goodbyes. And as I bussed plates, I noticed my mother and Cordelia still at the far table, heads together over coffee. Neither one was drinking, talking low and long, and my mother was nodding the way she nods at church. Small, obedient, grateful. I told myself they were discussing centerpieces. You'd have told yourself something too. Now, before anyone in the comments says she should have seen it coming, I did see something coming, and I did something about it. And I want that on the record. That night, I called my mother directly. Mom, is anyone making noise about the flower girl? Because Cordelia said a thing at the tasting, my mother's voice came back smooth as fondant. Oh, that's just how Cordelia talks. Winnie is the flower girl. It's settled. Celeste, don't be dramatic. Then I called my sister, because I believe in redundant systems. Aubrey, straight answer. Is there any version of this where Winnie isn't your flower girl? And my little sister, the bride, the person Winnie was tearing up junk mail for every night, said what? No, Celeste, I asked her myself. She's my flower girl. I love that little weirdo. She even texted me a photo an hour later, the lilac dress on its hanger with a heart drawn over it, and the words, my girl. I'm asking you honestly. What else does a reasonable person do? I asked the two people in charge separately, on purpose. I got the same answer twice, plus a photograph with a heart on it. There's no third phone call to make when your mother and your sister answer in unison. There's only trust or paranoia, and I'd spent my whole life being the family's steady one, not its detective. So I trusted. I went back to my prep lists and my hallway full of paper petals. What I could not have known, what nobody tells you until you've lived it, is that the answer was true when they gave it. The sale just hadn't closed yet. May was a blur of the good kind of work. 5 courses for 170 means logistics like a small military campaign. Rented china counted twice. A second van. 6 extra hands hired for the night. Herbs started in trays by the walk-in, because I'm particular about mint. I ran wedding prep as vendor and big sister at once, and mostly loved both jobs. I built Aubrey a tasting box of 3 cake fillings and watched her do her happy shoulder dance. I steamed the linen napkins myself, but 2 small things from that month stayed lodged the way a pebble stays in a boot. First, at the venue walkthrough, my mother introduced me to Thistlewood's coordinator with one hand on my shoulder. This is the caterer. And then a beat later, as an afterthought, with a little laugh, my daughter. In that order. The coordinator, a kind woman named Pretty, glanced between us and dutifully wrote caterer on her clipboard. Second, the budget began performing miracles. My mother's share of an Ashcroft scale wedding should have been modest. That was the whole understood arrangement. That's why my checkbook and my kitchen were the dowry. And yet suddenly there was a videographer with a drone, a champagne tower, chair covers upgraded to something called Dupioni. When I asked, gently accountant to hostess, where the sudden altitude was coming from, my mother waved the question away with a hand gesture I now think of as the overture. I've managed it. A mother finds ways. A mother finds ways. Friends? Write that down next to everyone gives something. The 2 sentences were about to meet. Meanwhile, my mother was undergoing a transformation the whole town could watch. She changed her mother. Of the bride dress 3 times, each version a shade closer to Ashcroft gray. She borrowed a bracelet from a woman at church and practiced saying Ashcroft with the little pause in the middle that Cordelia used, like the name deserved a moment of silence. She started sentences with Cordelia, feels the way other people cite scripture. I'd drop off groceries and find her at the kitchen table with seating charts spread out like war maps, moving place cards around with tweezers. Actual tweezers. Murmuring about who could be trusted next to whom. And look, I'd known my mother's hunger my whole life. Known where it came from. The store. Brand casserole years. The kindness that looks down. I had compassion for it. That was my mistake, if you want one. I had so much compassion for her hunger that I never asked what it was currently eating. In late May, The church held an early walkthrough for the wedding party. Winnie attended in her practice shoes, carrying her basket of paper petals like a chalice, and she walked that aisle with the gravity of a state funeral, and then looked back at me and grinned. And honest to God, the stained glass had nothing on her. In the third pew from the back sat Cordelia Ashcroft, who did not applaud. Beside her sat Prudence, and I noticed this the way you notice a wrong note, a white dress to a walkthrough. Nobody puts a 6-year-old in white tulle for a Tuesday walkthrough unless somebody somewhere is picturing something. I felt the pebble in the boot again. I reminded myself. 2 phone calls, 1 heart emoji, settled. You know that feeling when your gut files a report your heart refuses to read. The next pebble arrived at Aubrey's bachelorette, which I catered, because of course I did. Past appetizers and a Prosecco bar at a rented lake cabin for 10 shrieking women. I was boxing leftovers in the kitchen around midnight when one of the bridesmaids, a girl named Cameron, who'd had roughly her body weight in Prosecco, drifted in hunting for cake and decided we were confidants. You're like the sister who does everything, she said, with drunk sincerity. This whole wedding is basically a team effort, I said, sealing a lid. Right, but like, and here she leaned in, wobbling. Thank God for Miss C though. Seriously? If she hadn't stepped up with the... And then Cameron's eyes performed a full system reboot. Her mouth closed. Her face did the thing faces do when a sentence hits a guardrail installed by someone sober. The flowers, she finished, in a different voice. She's paying for some flowers. I think I'm so drunk, ignore me. She laughed too loudly, took her cake, and executed the fastest exit her heels allowed. I stood in that cabin kitchen with a roll of plastic wrap in my hand, doing the thing I do with numbers when a client's books don't balance. Not panicking, just noticing, noting the entry. Stepped up with the what? The videographer, the champagne tower, the Dupioni. A mother finds ways. And apparently some of the ways had a first name, but even then, and I want you to hear how reasonable this sounded at midnight, even then, the worst I imagined was money for vendors. Rich families sponsor weddings. Water is wet. It never once occurred to me that anything in that budget wasn't for sale by its owner. 8 days later, my phone rang. It was a Tuesday. 3 weeks out from the wedding. I was in the walk, in cooler counting cases of butter when my mother called, and I answered with my shoulder, pen still moving. I want to reconstruct this call for you nearly word for word, because the engineering of it deserves study. She opened with logistics. Final counts. Her cousin's gluten thing. Got me nodding in vendor mode. And then, in the exact same scheduling tone, no gear change at all, she said, oh, and the processional's been updated. Prudence will be doing the flower girl honors. It's an Ashcroft tradition. The flower girl comes from their side, apparently it goes back generations. Isn't that sweet? And listen, since the reception's really an adult crowd, we think it's simplest if Winnie sits this one out altogether. She'll be so much happier at home with a sitter anyway. You know how long these things run. Silence, the cooler fan hummed. My pen had stopped. Sits this one out, I repeated. Of the wedding. You're uninviting Winnie from the wedding. Uninviting is a very dramatic word, said my mother, who had just done it. It's a kindness, honestly. And Celeste, here it came, the proverb, polished from 40 years of use. Everyone gives something to make a wedding beautiful. Don't make this a thing. Don't make this a thing. My daughter had a countdown calendar taped to her closet door with 21 hand-drawn tulips on it, one for each day left. And my mother had just erased her from the event in 40 seconds, between the gluten cousin and goodbye. I said very quietly that we'd talk soon, and I hung up, and I stood in the cold with the butter. Marisol found me there a minute later. She turned off the mixer without asking anything. Here's the cruelest scheduling detail of my whole life. That same evening was Winnie's final dress fitting, long promised. Marked on her tulip calendar with 3 exclamation points. She had been counting on it for a week. Bring the dress to Mama's big kitchen so it wouldn't wrinkle. Try it on where there was real spinning room. What was I supposed to do? Cancel. I hadn't figured out what to say yet. I hadn't figured out how to breathe yet. So at 6 o'clock, my daughter stood in the middle of my commercial kitchen on Vandermeer Road in her lilac dress, hair in the practice bun she'd taught herself, socks on the painted concrete because shoes might scuff. And she spun, arms out, chin up, till rising like something about to lift off. Marisol clapped the count with her 15, 16, 17. And Winnie stuck the landing, wobbled, triumphant, flushed. 18 Mama. I tied my record in the dress. And I stood by the steel prep table, applauding, with my mother's phone call sitting in my chest like a swallowed stone, watching this small, serious person shine inside a role that had already been taken from her, sold out from under her socks, and she didn't know it. If you've ever had to smile at a child across the exact distance of a secret that's going to break them. If you've ever been the only person in the room who knows the beautiful thing is already gone, tell me in the comments, because I've read enough of them to know I'm not the only one who stood at that prep table. And subscribe if you haven't, because I promise you this story is going somewhere. Winnie changed back into play clothes, hung the dress reverently on the office door, and asked, buckling her seatbelt, "Is tomorrow the church practice again?" I said, "Not tomorrow, baby." I drove us home the long way, past the water, buying myself 4 extra minutes to become a mother who knew what to say. I did not become one. I told her the next night, after dinner, in the gentlest version I could construct. Plans had changed. The wedding was going to be a grown-ups only party, so no flower girl walk this time. Not her fault. Nothing to do with her. Sometimes weddings just change. I had decided she'd never know about prudence if I could help it. My daughter listened with her hands folded, 7 years old, going on notary public, and nodded. "Okay," she said, "that's okay." And for about 2 hours, I let myself believe we'd landed it. Then, passing her door at bedtime, I heard it. The small, deliberate, muffled crying of a child who has chosen the pillow specifically so nobody will hear, which is the exact worst sound this world makes. I went in. She surfaced, blotchy, trying to be fine, and asked the question, the one I will be hearing in some back room of my skull for the rest of my life. "Mama, did I do something wrong?" She thought she'd been fired. Of course she did. She's a person who practices. In her universe, roles are earned. So losing one must mean a performance review had come back bad. I said no, 100 ways. She nodded politely at all 100, believing none of them. Over the next days, I watched my noticing child quietly close the file on herself. The lilac dress stayed on the closet door, but she stopped looking at it from bed. She turned her pillow the other way. The tulip calendar disappeared into a drawer, folded, not crumpled, which was worse. And she stopped spinning. That's the detail that finished me. No more counting in the hallway. My kid had a personal record, and she retired it at 7 without a press conference. Grief in children is quiet like that. It cleans up after itself. Meanwhile, I still didn't know the why. That took 8 more days and one wobbly bridesmaid's guardrail finally failing. I'm a bookkeeper of a cook. When something doesn't balance, I pull the thread until the whole seam confesses. Thread 1, Pretty, the Thistlewood coordinator, called me about Lennon's, and in passing mentioned the videographer's second invoice had been settled. Mrs. Ashcroft's personal check again, such a generous family. And then, hearing herself, added quickly, "Well, you didn't hear the details from me." Again, personal check. Thread 2, Cameron's guardrail. Thank God for Miss C. If she hadn't stepped up with the. And thread 3, the one that snapped the seam. I drove to the bridal studio where Aubrey was having her final fitting. Waited while the seamstress pinned, and then, alone with my sister among the mirrors, I asked one question in my calm voice, the voice I use when a client's deposits don't match their register. "Aubrey, what exactly did Cordelia's $10,000 buy?" I didn't know it was 10,000. I said a number to sound like I knew things. I said the wrong one. Actually, I said 5. And my little sister, in a wedding dress held together with pins, went white and corrected me. It wasn't 5, it was 10. And then her hand went to her mouth, and the mirrors gave me 6 copies of my sister realizing what she'd done. It came out of her in pieces. There between the mirrors, Cordelia had written Mama check. $10,000 for the wedding fund. After the tasting, a contribution and the family tradition, the one condition, unspoken and completely spoken. Prudence carries the basket. It's just, it paid for so much, Celeste. The video, the chairs. Mom said Winnie would never even have to know. I was gonna tell you. I kept almost telling you. She was crying now, pins and all. It's one walk down one aisle. It didn't seem like it cost anything. I looked at my sister, the bride my daughter tore up junk mail for, and I heard myself say, from very far away, it cost 18 spins. I drove from the bridal studio to my mother's house. 14 minutes, no radio. and found her at the kitchen table with the seating chart and the tweezers. I didn't sit. Cordelia's check, I said. 10,000. When were you going to mention what it bought? And here is the thing about my mother that took me 33 years to fully learn. She doesn't deny. Daniel admits a crime happened. Instead, she presents. She set down the tweezers, folded her hands, and gave me the shareholder report. The Ashcrofts, she informed me, were spending $60,000 on this wedding. 60. Our side's entire contribution was. And she said this next phrase without apparent pain. You're cooking. Was she supposed to let Aubrey enter that family as the bride whose people brought a casserole? Cordelia's gift had dignity in it, Celeste. The video, the chairs, the champagne. Your sister will have a wedding no one in that family can sniff at. And Prudence, a lovely child, traditions matter to old families. Winnie will bounce back. Children forget these things by August. Children forget. My daughter, the human clipboard, who still remembers the name of a waitress who gave her extra cherries in 2023. I asked my one question. I'd rehearsed it for 14 radioless minutes. Mom, did you cash the check before or after you crossed your granddaughter off the guest list? My mother's hands didn't move, but her chin lifted, the tell she has when a question is beneath answering, which is the tell she has when the answer is bad. Don't be vulgar about the order of things, she said finally. It was all one arrangement. All one arrangement. There it was. The tidiest confession she'd ever give. I didn't yell. Yelling would have comforted her. It would have made me the dramatic one, the overreactor, a role she had costumes for. I said, thank you for being precise. And I left. And I closed her front door with the softness you'd use on a sleeping baby's room, which frightened her more than a slam ever could. I know. Because she texted me twice before I reached the end of the street. Now, let me lay out the box I was standing in, because I've read enough internet advice to know what you're shouting at your speaker. Cancel the catering. Take back the money. Burn it down, Queen. Friends, I priced that fire, line by line, like everything else in my life. Walk away from the contract 11 days out, Thistlewood books vendors jointly, bailing on an assigned event torpedoes not just this wedding, but my standing with the venue that feeds my company its best referrals. In a town this size, the caterer who abandoned her own sister's wedding isn't a rumor, it's a headstone. My 5 years, Marisol's paycheck, the 4 part-timers, the walk-in cooler I signed for with shaking hands. Kindling all of it, and the deposit sunk. Thistlewood doesn't refund at 17 days. My $6,800 was already furniture. The only people a cancellation would actually starve were 170 guests who'd never done anything to me worse than the chicken dance. That's the thing about rage. It's a cleaver, and most of what's in range is bystanders. But the final vote, the one that actually decided it, came from a 7-year-old. Winnie overheard me in the kitchen with Marisol, going harder than I meant to, saying words like pull the crew and let them serve gas station trays. And my daughter, uninvited, demoted, retired from spinning, tugged my apron and looked up at me with those serious accountant eyes and said, "Don't wreck Aunt Aubrey's wedding, Mama. The flowers are going to be so pretty. That's who was raised right in this family, in case anyone's keeping minutes. So I would cook the wedding. Every course, perfectly, because my name was on the van either way. But somewhere between the cooler and that apron tug, a second menu started writing itself in me. Very calm, very itemized. I would cook. And then, when the last plate was down, I was going to say grace. 8 days out, I did my prep, and I mean all of it. In my kitchen, prep is sacred. Everything measured, everything labeled, nothing improvised at the stove that could have been decided calmly at the counter. So I prepped the toast the way I prep a service. I wrote it on recipe cards, actual index cards from the box by my stove, because if my hands were going to shake in that ballroom, they were going to shake holding something they trusted. 3 cards. Card 1, the gift, itemized. Card 2, the price, spoken plainly, no adjectives. Adjectives are where speeches go to die. Card 3, the closing. I drafted it standing up, the way I write menace, and I cut it the way Marisol trims fat. Ruthless, until 3 minutes was 3 minutes. Marisol read the cards on her break, lips moving, and when she finished, she looked at me for a long moment. She made one small edit. She crossed out upset and wrote precise, and she was right. Then she tapped the cards square like a deck and handed them back. "I'll be at tray 3, she said. Tray 3 is the station nearest the head table. That's Marisol's entire love language, and it is enough. Then the paperwork. I pulled our contract and read my own boring font. Balance waived at settlement, owner's gift. Settlement happens after the event. Nothing was waived yet. A gift not yet given can be returned to sender. I printed a clean invoice. The Bowen table. Services rendered. Balance due 9,300, net 15. And I slid it into a cream envelope, the kind that matches wedding stationery, because presentation matters in my business. The 60,800 for the venue I let go, on purpose. And I want you to hear why. That money bought me the truth about my mother, fair market value, honestly. Tuition. The envelope went into my knife roll. Next to the honing steel. 8 days to service. 5 days out, the family made me one last offer, and I want to show it to you in full, because it's a masterpiece of the genre. Aubrey texted. Aubrey, not my mother. My mother negotiates through envoys once a door has been closed softly at her. Talk to mom. Good news. If everything can just stay pleasant, Winnie is totally welcome to come to the reception part. There's a seat at table 14 after the ceremony stuff is done. That will live branch. I sat with that dove emoji for a long time. Table 14. I'd built the seating chart with my own hands under Tweezer's supervision. So let me give you the topography. Table 14 is the one by the kitchen doors, behind the speaker stack. The table where you put the plus ones nobody's met and the great uncle who tells the same story twice. That was the offer. My daughter could be readmitted to her aunt's wedding as an afterthought. With a chair after the aisle, after Prudence's pedals, after the part she'd practiced for, provided her mother stayed pleasant. The old me, and I'll own this, would have taken it. The old me was a broker for scraps. I'd spent 17 years converting scraps into gratitude and calling the exchange family. And friends, the pull was real. The want doesn't die quietly, it whispered. She'd still get to wear the dress, she'd get cake, take the seat, keep the peace, half a loaf. But I kept thinking of Winnie's pillow, turned the other way, facing away from the dress. You don't hand a child a consolation seat at the auction where her role was sold. You don't teach her that her place in a family is a coach ticket subject to her mother's behavior. I typed and deleted 4 drafts of a response, and then sent the only sentence that was true and complete. Winnie has plans. 3 dots appeared, stopped, appeared, stopped, nothing came. Good, let them wonder. Winnie, in fact, did have plans. We'll get there. The night before the wedding, I stood alone in the Thistlewood barn until nearly midnight doing final staging. And yes, the irony was thick enough to slice. The uninvited child's mother, personally laying out 170 place settings, according to Renata Bowen's laminated chart. I did it perfectly. Understand that about me. The plates were going to be perfect either way, because half of what I planned to say the next night only worked if nobody could dismiss me as sloppy, or bitter, or slipping. Excellence was the receipt for my 3 minutes. So I squared every charger, spaced every fork, smoothed every napkin fan the way Winnie folds them, 2 hands. At the head table, I placed Cordelia's card and my mother's card, third from center, exactly where the chart commanded. At the spot down front where the flower girl sits, the card said Prudence in calligraphy, my mother had paid extra for. I set it down gently. Not the kid's fault. 6-year-olds don't broker their own bookings. That little girl was as much a prop in this as mine was a casualty. And then I did one small thing for me. Our standard service includes a printed card at each place. The Bowen table thanks you, with our little flower logo. Free advertising. Always has been. I walked the room and collected all 170 of them into my apron pocket. My company's name was coming off this production. The food would speak. The flourish belonged to a table that these people had closed themselves. On the drive home, Marisol texted. Crew briefed. Trays timed. Card 3 has a typo, fixed it. You good? I texted back the truest status report of my adult life. Mise plus everything in its place. Tomorrow, service. The wedding day ran like a kitchen dream, which is to say, controlled fire. We loaded in at noon. The ceremony happened at 4 at First Methodist. I wasn't there. I was the caterer, remember, and the caterer belongs with her ovens. I heard about it secondhand from Preeti, who floated through my kitchen for a timeline check and said, not unkindly, the little Ashcroft girl did the flowers. Roses. She got bored halfway and handed the basket to a groomsman. My Winnie once practiced pedal rationing for 2 months so the whole ISIL would get its share. Life will keep sending you these small invoices. File them. At 6, cocktail hour hit the terrace and my kitchen went to war speed. Trays out, trays back, Marisol calling counts, the 6 extra hands moving clean, and the compliments started rolling back to us through the swinging doors the way they do, second hand, vendor, flavored. Pretty again, delighted. Mrs. Ashcroft, the grandmother, just told her whole table, this is the best wedding food she's had in 20 years. She asked who did it. And before I could feel anything about that, Pretty added the punchline she didn't know was a punchline. The mother of the bride said, "Oh, a place we know. A place we know. 16 years of holidays out of my hands. $6,800 of my deposit under their dance floor. My sister's wedding dinner at cost from my knives. A place we know." I stood at the pass with a torch in my hand, finishing creme brulee tops, and I laughed. Actually laughed, alone, because there's a point past hurt where the truth just becomes funny. And if you've ever been introduced sideways by your own family as the help, as a place they know, put it in the comments and subscribe, because the next 10 minutes of this story are for you. At 8:40, the band leader announced toasts. At 9:15, the cake would roll. My window sat between them, narrow and golden, like a pass at rush. I took off my gloves. I took out the envelope and the cards. The toasts ran their course. The best man's golf story, a bridesmaid's poem, and then my mother. My mother rose in her Ashcroft gray dress and gave 3 minutes on the theme of family is everything. She actually said, and I quote, "Family is the one thing money can't buy," and the room awed. And somewhere by tray 3, I heard Marisol make a sound like a kettle deciding against it. When the applause faded and the band leader reached for his mic to call for the cake, I walked out of the kitchen doors, through the middle of that ballroom, in my chef's whites, clean jacket. I keep one hanging for front of house, with a water glass in one hand and a spoon in the other. And I tapped the glass 3 times. That sound, you'd be amazed. A ballroom full of champagne and chatter goes quiet for a spoon on glass out of pure Pavlovian wedding training. They think another toast is coming. And technically, they were right. 170 faces turned. I saw my mother's smile hold its position while her eyes ran the calculations. The caterer is standing in the middle of the floor. The caterer is my daughter. My daughter has cards in her hand. I saw Aubrey, mid-laugh, go still. I saw Cordelia Ashcroft lower her fork with the leisurely caution of an old general who smells weather changing. Speeches are just recipes. Mise en place, heat management, plating. I looked once at Marisol, at tray 3, who nodded exactly 1 centimeter. Then I raised my glass and read card 1 in the voice I used to call orders. Calm, carrying, unhurried, a voice that has never once been dramatic in its life, which is precisely what made every fork in that room stop moving. Good evening. Most of you don't know me, I'm Celeste. I'm the older sister of the bride, and I'm also tonight's caterer. Or, as I was introduced earlier, a place they know. A ripple went through the tables, the sound of a room reshuffling its assumptions. I let it settle. Every plate you ate tonight came off my knives. The tasting in April, the 5 courses, the brulee you're holding, my company, my hands. It was my gift to my little sister. So is the deposit on this room. My family isn't wealthy, like some families here tonight. I nodded pleasantly at no one in particular. So we give what we have. My mother taught me that, actually. She has a saying. At the head table, my mother's face went through a tiny seismic event, because she knew the saying, and she knew I had it in my hand. Loaded. Everyone gives something to make a wedding beautiful. I paused. Card 2. 3 weeks ago, my 7-year-old daughter was taken off this wedding's guest list. She was supposed to be the flower girl. She practiced in our hallway every night for 2 months. She had a countdown calendar with hand-drawn tulips, and I was told it was a tradition thing, a logistics thing, a kindness. It wasn't. It was a transaction. The room had gone to a silence with texture, the kind you can feel on your arms. There was a contribution to this wedding of $10,000 by personal check, on the understanding that the flower girl's basket would change hands. My mother accepted it. My daughter was the line item. She's home tonight with a sitter. And for the record, she told me not to wreck this party, because she wanted the flowers to be pretty. She's 7, and she was the only person in this arrangement who behaved like family. Somewhere back left, a chair creaked, Holden Ashcroft was staring at his grandmother with his mouth open. The groom, ladies and gentlemen, the last honest man in the building, did not know. My mother stood up, not gracefully. She rose like something pulled on a wire, and the word came out, her half command, half plea. Celeste. And then, in front of the room she'd spent a year arranging with tweezers, my mother's composure cracked down a seam I'd never seen open in public, and what fell out was 40 years old and true. You have no idea what it's like, she said, and her voice was shaking, wholly unrehearsed for the first time in decades. I have been the poor relation my entire life. The charity pew. The casserole they were kind about. One time I wanted this family to walk into a room and not be the ones everyone quietly feels sorry for. One wedding where we weren't the folding table in the corner. And for a moment, I'll admit it to you, because this channel doesn't sell cardboard villains. The room tilted toward her, and so did something in my chest, because that was a real wound, older than me, and I'd grown up eating at its table. My mother was a scared girl once too. The arithmetic she did on my daughter had been done on her long ago, by people with better silver. I felt it. It just didn't change anything, because you can be a casualty and a cannon at the same time. And she'd aimed at a 7-year-old. Then I watched her feel the room's pity and decide to invest it. Her chin lifted, her voice found its committee register, and she turned to the tables like a hostess reclaiming a dropped tray. This is a family misunderstanding, everyone, and it will be handled priv. No, I said, not loud, just final. The word landed like a lid on a pot. You had it handled privately, Mom. Privately is where it happened. We're done with privately. And I took out the cream envelope. Card 3. So, about the gift. I walked unhurried, service pace, to the cake table, where 3 tiers of my own almond sponge stood under the chandelier, and I laid the cream envelope against the base, propped like a place card. A gift is a thing given freely between people who see each other. What happened here wasn't that. So I've done some bookkeeping. The catering balance I was going to waive tonight, $9,300, standard rate, itemized, is no longer waived. The invoice is in this envelope, made out to the client of record, the mother of the bride. Net 15 days. I turned to my mother, who had gone the color of the tablecloth. It's almost exactly the size of a certain check, Mom. That money was always going to be spent on this wedding. I've just corrected which line it lands on. Consider my daughter's dignity undonated. A sound moved through the room that wasn't quite a gasp and wasn't quite laughter. The sound of arithmetic completing simultaneously in 170 heads. The venue deposit stays my gift to Aubrey. The dinner you've eaten also paid, also perfect. And my crew will serve the cake and coffee and take beautiful care of you for the rest of the night. Because none of you did anything wrong. And neither did the food. I looked at my sister then, and this part costs the most, so I said it the most carefully. Aubrey, I love you. I have loved you since you were 10 days old, and I catered your wedding with everything I've got. I hope your marriage is kinder than its opening ceremony. But you knew. You watched her practice, and you knew, and you spent it. Aubrey was crying, pins and mirrors crying, mascara gone, and she didn't say anything because there wasn't anything. And we both knew that too. You were right about one thing, Mom. I picked up my water glass one last time. Everyone gives something to make a wedding beautiful. Winnie gave the most. As of tonight, my table is closed. I set the glass down. Nobody moved. 170 of Cedar Bluff's best dressed sat in a silence you could have plated, and the band leader held his microphone like he'd forgotten its purpose. I untied my apron, the good black one, the one I'd worn to 400 services, folded it in half and in half again, and laid it over the back of an empty chair at the head table. There was one more stop on my way out. Cordelia Ashcroft sat perfectly straight, fork still down, watching me approach with the composure of a woman who has never once been the subject of a scene she didn't authorize. I stopped beside her chair and kept my voice at conversation volume, because some receipts are hand-delivered. The food really is the best you've had in 20 years, I said. That part was true. Here's the other true thing. You bought an aisle tonight, you got it. Roses, drone footage, the works. But the little girl who practiced sharing her petals with the whole aisle, you couldn't afford her. Nobody in this room could. Cordelia looked at me for a long moment. And I'll give the old general this. She didn't pretend not to understand. Something behind the pearls registered the entry in a ledger, even she couldn't buy back. She gave me a single nod. One queen acknowledging that a border exists. I walked the length of that ballroom to the kitchen doors, past tray 3, where Marisol stood with her chin high holding her station like a color guard. Crew finishes the night, I told her. Full pay, full polish, cake at 9s and 15. Yes, chef, said Marisol. Louder than necessary, and God bless her, it rang off the chandeliers like a bell. In the parking lot, under the string lights, I did the last piece of business. I peeled the magnetic sign off the silver van, the Bowen table, with love for Aubrey and Holden, the custom one I'd printed for the occasion, rolled it, and dropped it in the passenger footwell. My company's flourish was off this production for good. Then I sat behind the wheel for 1 minute. Just one. I timed it, kitchen habit, and let my hands shake now that they were allowed. Here's what I want you to know about how winning actually feels, because this channel doesn't sell fireworks. It feels like the walk-in cooler. Cold, quiet, necessary. I had just, in 3 minutes, spent my mother, my sister, and the last unexamined story of my childhood. The one where enough service eventually purchases a seat. Nobody applauded when I left that ballroom. Weddings don't applaud the caterer. I drove home through town with the windows down, June air, 14 minutes, and the sitter met me at the door with her finger to her lips. But Winnie was awake anyway. Of course she was, sitting up in bed with her lamp on, waiting for the report. Did everyone like the food? She asked. They said it was the best in 20 years, I said, which was sourced and accurate. Was the cake pretty? The cake was very pretty. She nodded, satisfied, my serious little quality control department. And then she slid down onto her pillow, and I noticed, the way I notice everything about her now, that the pillow was turned back around, facing the closet door, facing the dress. Mama, she said, already half asleep, is it Sunday tomorrow? It's a Sunday tomorrow, baby. Good, she said, I have plans. The bill for my 3 minutes arrived overnight, in installments, the way those bills do. 2 missed calls from my mother. No voicemails. She doesn't leave evidence. I come by that honestly. 1 voicemail from Aubrey at 1 in the morning, 4 minutes long, wedding band still audible in the background, half sobbed and half slurred. How could I, on her day, in front of everyone? And then, in the same breath, I'm sorry, Celeste. I'm so sorry, I kept almost telling you. Followed by a long, wet silence, and then very small before the click. The food really was perfect. That voicemail is the whole story of my sister. 30 seconds over budget, as always. There was also a text from an unknown number with an Ashcroft, adjacent area code that said simply magnificent. See. I have elected not to interpret that. I sat on my porch at 2 a.m. with a glass of the good stuff I cater with, and let the cost be the cost. I don't want anyone hearing this to think boundaries feel like victory montages. They feel like amputation. Clean, surgical, survivable, and gone is still gone. My mother had held my daughter as a newborn. My sister once slept in my bed for a month after Dad died, 10 years old, scared of the quiet. Those people are real, and I closed the table on them too, because they'd folded in with the people who priced my child. Both things get to be true. That's the tax. I paid it. I sat with it. And then I went inside and slept without dreaming, which my body apparently considered payment received. The epilogue arrived in envelopes, mostly, which felt fitting. Day 11, a bank transfer hit the Bowen table account. 9,300 exact, no memo. My mother paid the invoice, 4 days inside net 15, and since the first check had already been spent on drones and Dupioni, I'd bet the walk, in cooler that a second Ashcroft check quietly made the trip. Some scandals are cheaper settled, and Cordelia settles, which means Ashcroft money did, in the end, fund my daughter's dignity. Just not the way anyone planned. Renata and I have not spoken since the ballroom. She tells the church ladies I embarrassed the family. Half of them nod, and the other half, I'm told, started ordering their event trays from a place they know. My fall calendar filled by August. Retirement parties, 2 weddings, the hospital gala, booked by women who looked me in the eye a beat longer than necessary when they called. Small towns keep 2 sets of books. The official one runs on names, but the real one runs on witnesses. Aubrey sent a printed thank you card from the honeymoon, the same one every guest got, but under the printed script she'd written in shaky ballpoint. I'm going to tell Winnie I'm sorry myself, when I'm brave enough. I'm working on it. I put it in the drawer with the folded tulip calendar. The door isn't nailed shut for her. She was 10 once, asleep in my bed, scared of the quiet. I don't forget my originals. But the table stays closed until the apology goes to the 7-year-old it's owed in person, at kid height. My terms are famously itemized. And that Sunday, the Sunday Winnie had plans, is the part of this story I'd keep if I could only keep one thing. We called it Flower Girl Day. Sunday afternoon, my backyard. In attendance me, Marisol and her husband, Mrs. Ferris from next door and her sister, Winnie's sitter and Pretty, the coordinator, who heard about it and asked, with damp eyes, if she could come. Apparently even wedding professionals get tired of watching the wrong things win. We set my long prep table on the grass with the checkered cloth, lemon cake from my kitchen, marigolds in jam jars, and a playlist Winnie curated herself with clipboard, level seriousness. And down the middle of the lawn, we mowed an aisle. My daughter put on the lilac dress, took it off the closet door herself, which mattered, her decision, her ceremony. And she walked that grass aisle, scattering real marigold petals from her practice basket, rationing them with 2 months of professional technique, sharing them with the whole aisle, while 6 adults stood and clapped like it was the royal wedding. Then she planted her arms, launched, and spun. Tulle flying, cheeks blazing, bare feet on June grass, counting out loud, with the whole yard counting behind her. And she blew past 18 without even slowing. And when she finally stopped, staggering, drunk on rotation, she threw both fists up and screamed, 23, Mama! 23! New record! New record! In witness whereof, 1 backyard, 6 adults, 1 lemon cake, $0 changing hands. That night, tucking her in, sweaty curls and grass on her feet, my daughter looked up at me, already going under, and delivered the closing entry, the one I'd been waiting weeks to hear her file. Mama, I didn't do anything wrong. Not a question this time. A finding. No, baby, I said. You never did. She was asleep before the lamp clicked. I stood in her doorway a long time, looking at the lilac dress back on its door. Retired now from other people's weddings. Undefeated at home. Here's the one thing I'd have you take from my kitchen. If you never send the bill, the people around you will quietly decide that your work, your patience, and even your children are free. And the kindest, most loving thing I have ever done as a mother was to stand up in a room full of chandeliers, tap a glass, and announce that nothing about us was ever free. That's my story. 1 lilac dress, 1 $10,000 check, and a 3-minute toast that cost me a mother and bought back a little girl's spin. If someone's been treating your work, or your child like a line item, consider this your sign to close the table. Share this with someone who needs it. Tell me in the comments what you'd have said with that glass in your hand, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.